The small town of Crestwood, nestled in a wooded area of New England, had always been a quiet place. With its cobblestone streets and Victorian houses, Crestwood looked like something out of a postcard. But that tranquility was broken one autumn night when something dark and malevolent began to stalk its inhabitants. It was a cold night when the first victim turned up. Young Tommy Harris, just 12 years old, was found in the woods, his eyes open in a grimace of terror. There were no signs of a struggle, no visible injuries, but the fear on his face was unmistakable. The community was shocked, and rumors soon began to circulate about a dark presence in the forest. As the days went by, more people began to experience strange occurrences. Susan Miller, a single mother, woke up in the middle of the night to hear whispering in her room. When she turned on the light, she found no one there, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Her daughter, Emma, began having nightmares about a dark figure chasing her. Fear spread quickly. People avoided going out at night, and the streets of Crestwood emptied at dusk. The town's sheriff, Bob Thompson, tried to calm the population, but he himself began to doubt the safety of the place. One night, while investigating the strange occurrences, Bob decided to patrol the forest where Tommy had been found. Armed with a flashlight and his pistol, he walked through the trees, every rustle putting him on edge. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging Bob into total darkness. "Who's there?" he shouted, trying to remain calm. An icy cold enveloped him, and then he saw it, a tall, thin figure, with eyes glowing like embers, emerging from the darkness. Bob raised his gun, but his hands were shaking. "You can't stop me," the figure whispered in a guttural voice, echoing in Bob's mind. With a shout, Bob fired, but the figure disappeared before the bullet could reach it. The flashlight came back on, and Bob was left alone in the woods, panting and sweating cold. He knew that Crestwood was in grave danger. The next day, Bob called an emergency meeting at the village church. People gathered around, their faces pale and filled with fear. Bob recounted his encounter with the dark figure, and panic gripped the crowd. "We are cursed," an old woman shouted from the back of the room. "How are we going to fight something we can't see?" another person asked, her voice shaking. Bob raised his hands, calling for calm. "We must stick together. Whatever it is, it wants to spread fear. We cannot let it control us," he said firmly. They decided to organize night patrols and establish a curfew. Doors and windows were secured with nails and boards, and protective amulets were distributed. As the days passed, the shadows' attacks became more frequent and violent. One night, the Thompson farm, on the outskirts of town, was attacked. George Thompson, the farm owner, was fixing the corral fence when he felt a chill run down his spine. Turning, he saw the same dark figure that had terrified Bob. George tried to run, but the figure moved with unearthly speed. The animals in the barnyard began to go crazy, kicking and neighing, as the shadow advanced on George. Suddenly, a thick fog surrounded the farm, and George's screams echoed through the night. At dawn, he was found unconscious, with claw marks on his chest and his face twisted in a grimace of terror. The terror in Crestwood reached its peak when several young girls began to disappear. Anna Wilson, a 16-year-old girl, was the first to disappear. One night, her parents found her in bed, pale and sweaty, muttering about shadows and glowing eyes. They let her rest, but the next day, Anna was not home. They searched the village and the forest, but there was no sign of her. A few days later, her friend Emily, who had heard the rumors about Anna, also began having nightmares. That same night, she disappeared from home. Her parents searched frantically for her, but found only her diary, filled with scribbles about shadows watching her. The last to disappear was Laura, a young woman known for her adventurous spirit. Laura had decided to investigate the forest on her own, drawn by the horror stories that were circulating. Her friends warned her, but she laughed at their fears. By dawn, Laura had disappeared without a trace. Desperate parents demanded answers, but no one could explain what was happening. The disappearances created an atmosphere of paranoia. Families began sealing their doors and windows, fearing that the shadow would take more young people. A week after Laura disappeared, the town woke up to terrifying news. In the morning, some hunters found Anna, Emily, and Laura in a clearing in the woods, tied to tree trunks. They were in a trance-like state, their eyes empty and lifeless. Their bodies seemed to have been stripped of all vital energy. The parents, seeing their daughters, were filled with hope and horror. Bob and a group of volunteers took the girls to the village clinic. While the doctors tried to revive them, the entire village gathered in the square, terrified by what they had witnessed. Sarah Collins, a young journalist from the town, decided to investigate the origins of the dark figure. She spent days in the library, poring over old records and accounts of the region. She discovered a legend about a vengeful spirit, known as the Shadow, who had terrorized Crestwood centuries ago. According to legend, El Sombra was the spirit of a man wrongly accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake. His anger and suffering transformed him into a malevolent entity, who swore revenge on the descendants of those who had condemned him. As Sarah gathered more information, she realized that the Shadow's story didn't just affect Crestwood, but was connected to several dark incidents in the town's history. It was then that she decided to bring her findings to Bob. With growing fear that the situation was getting out of hand, Bob decided to call a priest. Father Michael, known for his expertise in cases of possessions and paranormal phenomena, arrived in the village with serious determination. "We've been dealing with something we don't understand," Bob explained worriedly. "We need your help to exorcise this entity." Father Michael nodded, his face grave. "We need to carry out a purification ritual in the forest, where the girls were found. That is where the shadow manifests itself most strongly," he said, as a shiver ran through those present. On the night of the showdown, the town was on high alert. Bob, Sarah, Father Michael, and a group of volunteers headed into the woods, carrying with them the grimoire and the items needed for the ritual. They knew that facing the shadow would be their last chance to save Crestwood. Arriving at the clearing where Tommy had been found, they began to prepare the ritual. They lit a circle of candles and recited the words of the grimoire. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind blew out the candles, and the shadow appeared before them, his eyes shining with malevolence. "Do you think you can stop me?" the figure roared, its voice echoing in their minds. "We must be strong," Sarah whispered, clutching at Bob's hands. Father Michael stepped forward, holding a crucifix. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this place and these souls," he shouted, his voice ringing with authority. The shadow lunged at Bob, but he stood his ground, reciting the words of the grimoire. A bright light emanated from the circle of candles, enveloping the dark figure. The shadow screamed, an inhuman sound that echoed through the forest. "Now, Sarah!" Bob shouted. Sarah threw an amulet into the center of the circle, where it exploded in a burst of light. The shadow screamed one last time before dissolving into the darkness. With the shadow finally defeated, the atmosphere in Crestwood began to change. The fear that had enveloped the town slowly dissipated, and life began to return to normal. The other missing girls were found in the woods, dazed but alive. They had no memory of how they got there, but all spoke of a dark figure that had haunted them in their dreams. The parents, though grateful for their daughter's return, couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of fear at the thought of what they had faced. Bob and Sarah, seeing the girls return, decided to organize a support group to help the community heal. Over time, Crestwood returned to being the quiet, quaint town it had always been. However, the community never forgot the terror it had faced. The memory of the shadow served as a reminder of the importance of unity and bravery in the face of the unknown. Bob and Sarah became local heroes, their names remembered for generations. The town library added the grimoire and accounts of the battle against the shadow to its records, ensuring that the story would not be forgotten. Even as life in Crestwood returned to normal, echoes of those dark days would always remain. Every year, the town held a vigil in memory of those who suffered and disappeared. The young women who returned found strength in their experience, becoming community advocates and sharing their stories to help others face their own fears. Bob and Sarah continued to live in Crestwood, their bond stronger than ever. In their hearts, they knew that although the terror of the shadow had passed, the real fight was to keep the light of hope and unity alive in a sometimes dark and frightening world. The courage to face the unknown would resonate with generations to come, reminding everyone that even in the darkness, there is always a spark of light ready to shine. If you liked it, give us a like and subscribe. Thank you very much.